Welcome back to CIA Declassified. The air is a thick, sweltering soup of salty spray, wood smoke, and the iron tang of red clay mud clinging to the skin of everyone moving through the jagged mountain passes. It is the mid-1980s, my favorite time personally, and the jungles of Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua are breathing with the heat of 100 small ideological fires. This is the era of the proxy war, where the two superpowers of the world have turned the narrow waste of the Americas into a testing ground for survival. But while the headlines focus on the Contra War, a more silent, more pervasive operation is unfolding along the border trails. Imagine the absolute sensory overload of a border station at twilight, the relentless buzz of cicadas drowned out by the rhythmic thumping of transport helicopters, the sight of hundreds of flashlights flickering like fireflies against the dark tree line, and the persistent metallic smell of canned rations. Every person in this endless line is a story of flight, their faces illuminated briefly by the harsh blue light of a kerosene lamp as they reach the intake tent. There is a palpable sense of desperation, but beneath that, a deeper, colder layer of scrutiny. The men in civilian clothes standing behind the aid workers aren't checking for fevers. They are checking for the subtle callus on a trigger finger or the specific gait of a person trained in mountain warfare. The setting is one of mass displacement. Tens of thousands of people are on the move. Families carrying their lives in bundles, walking away from scorched earth. To the casual observer, it is a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions. But to the CIA, this tide of humanity is a security blind spot. They knew that within these columns of refugees walked the messengers, the recruiters, and the guerrilla leaders of the next revolution. They needed a way to filter the innocent from the insurgent. The era was defined by information chaos, and this decade, once a person crossed a jungle border, they effectively vanished from the global grid. There were no digital footprints, no interconnected databases. The agency realized that the traditional interrogation at the border was insufficient. They needed a persistent presence within the refugee communities. They needed to turn the act of seeking asylum into an act of data entry. To do this, they turned to the shadows. They began building a secret infrastructure that mirrored the legitimate aid organizations. They called it SKILLET. It was a project designed to monitor the refugee flow using methods that were, at the time, decades ahead of their civilian counterparts. They weren't just watching the soldiers in the mountains. They were cataloging the survivors in the valleys, creating a biometric map of a continent in crisis. Why the designation SKILLET? Unlike the more complex cryptonyms of the era, the name for this project was derived from a blunt, almost grim operational metaphor. In the technical parlance of the Directorate of Operations, the project was intended to turn up the heat on localized populations until the scum rose to the top. It was a reference to the sifting and searing process. The refugees were placed in the skillet of intense surveillance, and the resulting heat would force clandestine operatives to reveal themselves through their movements and associations. It was a clinical name for a project that treated human migration as a chemical reaction to be observed and manipulated. We are opening the case files on a project that turned the refugee trail into a laboratory of surveillance. SKILLET was a CIA project dedicated to the clandestine monitoring and biometric cataloging of political refugees. The project utilized front organizations disguised as religious and medical aid groups to gain access to restricted camps. Records show the use of hidden micro cameras inside portable medical diagnostic equipment to photograph refugees without their knowledge. The agency developed a manual biometric index that categorized individuals by iris pattern and ear shape using high-resolution photography. SKILLET established a network of safe houses along the Pan-American Highway to track the speed of human movement. Documentation confirms the use of chemical taggants applied to aid supplies to track where refugees traveled after leaving the camps. The project utilized linguistic analysis of recorded interviews to determine the specific village of origin for refugees claiming false identities. Records show that Skillet vessels and vehicles were equipped with burst transmitters to send census data to the Regional Intelligence Center. The agency used acoustic surveillance in camp marketplaces to record political affiliation and dissident levels. Skillet pioneered the use of pattern of life analysis to identify individuals who did not follow the standard routines of a displaced person. Documentation verifies the use of invisible ink stamps on refugee identification papers to track how many times a person crossed a border. The project developed portable data terminals that could be hidden in a standard briefcase to search for watch list names. Records confirm that Skillet technicians disguised radio antennas as flagpoles outside of aid tents. The agency used thermal imaging from helicopters to count refugees moving through dense jungle canopies at night. Skillet tested psychological profiling surveys disguised as health screenings to identify potential guerrilla sympathizers. Documentation reveals the use of false bottom crates and food shipments to smuggle surveillance hardware into protected zones. The project created shadow ledgers that mapped the family trees of known insurgents to predict where they would hide. Records show that Skillet intercepted postal mail from refugees to map out support networks in the United States. The agency developed remote seismic sensors to monitor foot traffic on unofficial jungle trails. Skillet utilized in-country informants who were paid in hard-to-acquire medicines for information on camp leaders. Documentation confirms the project used high-speed film processors in field offices to produce mugshot catalogs within hours. The agency modified standard-issue radios given to aid workers to include a passive listening mode for CIA use. Records verify that Skillet used graphology, handwriting analysis, to link refugee manifestos to known insurgent propaganda. The project developed biosensor mats placed under the entrance of medical tents to weigh and measure individuals automatically. Skillet used image enhancement software, primitive by today's standards, to clarify faces in grainy long-distance surveillance photos. Documentation shows the use of directional microphones hidden in water barrels to overhear private conversations at Camp Wells. The project utilized microfiche readers, F-I-C-H-E, hidden inside textbooks to allow agents to reference target list. Records verify that the agency built mobile interrogation vans that look like standard ambulances from the outside. Skillet utilized voice stress analysis software to detect deception during routine aid intake interviews. The agency embedded microtransmitters into local currency to track the flow of money into insurgent territories. Records confirm the use of UV-sensitive dyes sprayed on the exits of camps to identify who left during unauthorized hours. Skillet tested subliminal acoustic messaging through camp loudspeakers to discourage political assembly. The project utilized carbon dioxide sensors hidden in crates to detect stowaways in transport trucks. Documentation reveals that the agency technicians used specially modified Polaroid cameras that captured infrared light to see through certain types of clothing or bandages. The project created a master village registry to determine if a refugee's described home matched existing satellite photography. Records show the use of drug-tainted cigarettes provided to camp guards to lower their guard during unauthorized agency operations. Skillet utilized micro lenses hidden in the buttons of aid workers' vests for close-up facial capture. The agency developed portable signal jammers to prevent insurgents from using local radio to coordinate inside the camps. Documentation confirms the use of false dental records to identify and track individuals who moved between different regional camps. Skillet utilized inflatable antennas that could be deployed and camouflaged in the jungle within minutes. The project developed high-resolution telescopic cameras disguised as birdwatching equipment for border observation. Records verify the agency used synthetic pheromones to attract specifically trained tracking dogs to targets who fled the camps. Skillet utilized microfilm data dumps hidden in the heels of shoes worn by agency couriers. Documentation reveals the use of night vision goggles, Generation 1, for monitoring camp perimeters in total darkness. The project used fake Red Cross identification badges to bypass local military checkpoints. Records show the use of aerosolized markers that would stick to the shoes of refugees and glow under specific black light frequencies. Skillet utilized satellite phone prototypes to transmit urgent watch list hits back to headquarters. The agency created pseudo-refugee families consisting of trained assets to live in the camps and provide internal intelligence. Documentation confirms the project used digital encryption keys for radio transmissions that were changed every 6 hours. And then as far as the quotes go, here's one from a declassified field report. The camp is not a sanctuary, it is a filter. Here's one that is a declassified internal memorandum regarding Central American refugee flow. To control the border, one must first control the information of those who cross it. Quote from a declassified CIA Technical Services Division handbook, identification is the first step towards neutralization. Quote from a declassified report, technology has finally allowed us to strip the anonymity from the displaced. Quote from a declassified internal memo, the data collected in the camps is more valuable than any battlefield intelligence we are receiving from the Contras. Declassified CIA operational briefing dated 1984. In a sea of refugees, the only way to find the shark is to watch how the other fish move. And then a quote that is attributed to a redacted OS technical officer. We are essentially performing a census of the shadows. We need to know who is a victim and who is a victor, end quote. If you examine the personal disposition files of SKILLET, specifically those located in the Latin America Division archives, you will find the Echo Exclusion Appendix. It is a solid block of black ink spanning 72 pages of high-density operational logs. These pages are currently withheld under Exemption B1, which protects information that is classified for national security, and Exemption B3, which cites specific statutes that allow for the withholding of intelligence sources and methods. What is the agency hiding behind those black bars? I believe these redactions cover liaison handover protocols, the specific instructions for turning flagged refugees over to local death squads for extra legal questioning. I also suspect the redactions hide forced recruitment schemes where refugees were given the choice between deportation to war zones or infiltrating insurgent groups as CIA assets. I think the blacked out pages contain the digital testing logs for experimental behavioral conditioning conducted on unaccompanied minors within the camps. The sheer scale of the redactions suggests a level of human rights bypassing that would be impossible to justify in any era. When people are treated like data points, the theories start to multiply. For instance, there is the genetic tagging theory. Some speculate that SKILLET wasn't just tracking faces, but blood markers. The theory suggests they use vaccination drives to collect DNA to identify genetic predispositions towards revolutionary behavior. Then there's the satellite mind control speculation. This is the radical idea that SKILLET tested ELF, extremely low frequency, waves beamed from satellites to calm refugee populations and prevent camp riots. Then there is the human tracking chipping theory. This posits that the agency successfully implanted passive RFID prototypes into refugees under the guise of medical implants, allowing them to be tracked for life. Proponents point to strange scars found on survivors of the Honduran camps as physical evidence. And then there is the scary organ harvesting metadata theory. A darker speculation suggests that SKILLET was used to catalog tissue types and organ health of refugees. Theorists argue the biometric database was used to identify matches for high-ranking officials or wealthy assets in need of transplants, with those individuals vanishing from the records shortly after a match was found. Was SKILLET a success? Tactically, it was a cold efficiency. It successfully identified over 400 insurgent leaders and disrupted supply lines that relied on refugee cover. It provided the most accurate demographic map of Central America ever produced. The tactical success lay in the invisible filter. The agency could effectively purge a population of its leadership without ever firing a shot in public, simply by identifying the targets and waiting for them to leave the protected zone. Beyond the identification of high-value targets, the tactical win included the mapping of the invisible infrastructure. the routes, the couriers, and the safe houses that guerrilla forces had spent years cultivating. By monitoring the refugees, the agency gained a real-time tactical overview of the battlefield that exceeded the capabilities of any traditional scout or satellite. They weren't just reacting to movements, they were anticipating them by watching the ripple effects in the human tide. This tactical advantage allowed for surgical strikes on logistics hubs that were previously thought to be completely anonymous, effectively starving the insurgency of its most vital resource, the support of the displaced. Strategically, it was the blueprint for biometric governance. It proved that humanitarian cover is the most effective way to collect mass biometric data. It created a legacy database that is still used to track political movements in Latin America. It shifted the focus of counterinsurgency from territory to identity, a doctrine that now dominates the world's borders. The strategic success was also measured by the long-term stabilization of client regimes in the region. By providing local militaries with pre-vetted lists of dissidents, the agency ensured that political opposition was neutralized before it could reach a critical mass. This was strategic forecasting at its most cynical, using the present crisis to prevent the next one by ensuring no revolutionary seed could ever take root in the soil of a refugee camp. The program effectively turned a humanitarian liability into a strategic asset, creating a template for identity domination that would be exported to conflicts across the globe, from the Balkans to the Middle East. It redefined the very nature of national security, making the individual's biology the ultimate front line in the defense of state interests. As far as operational and technological breakthroughs go, there were quite a few, such as automated facial geometry. Mapping the distances between facial features to create a unique ID was a revolutionary concept in the mid-'80s. During the SKILLET project, this allowed the agency to identify individuals even if they grew beards or wore hats. Today, this technology has evolved into the facial recognition used in your smartphone face unlock and at every international airport security gate. The intelligence community now utilizes this on a massive scale for citywide surveillance, allowing them to track high-value targets through thousands of live CCTV feeds. In modern military operations, it is integrated into drone targeting systems to ensure kinetic strikes are performed on the correct individuals in dense, chaotic urban environments. Then there was behavioral pattern recognition. Using mathematic models to determine if a person's routine is natural or covered was a breakthrough in identifying spies. By monitoring how refugees interacted, the agency could find the person whose behavior was slightly too disciplined or whose social patterns didn't match their cover story. In the current day, this technology is the backbone of financial fraud detection used by banks and the predictive algorithms used by social media companies to dictate user engagement. The Department of Homeland Security employs this at borders to flag deceptive behavior in travelers, while the military uses it to identify anomalous human activity near supply routes, allowing them to stop IED attacks before they happen. And then, of course, low bandwidth biometric compression. The challenge of sending complex physical data like fingerprints over slow, unreliable radio waves in the jungle led to the development of sophisticated data compression techniques. This breakthrough is now the foundation of modern global telemedicine and digital health records used by the WHO in remote developing regions. For the modern intelligence community, it allows field operatives to transmit retinal scans or DNA profiles from handheld devices in seconds, regardless of the local infrastructure. This ensures that identity verification can occur in real time, allowing for the immediate capture or release of individuals in high-stakes environments. And covert scent and chemical tagging. Marking individuals with invisible markers that only specific sensors can detect allowed the agency to follow people long after they left the camps. Today, this science is used in high-value asset protection and anti-counterfeiting for luxury goods and high-security currency. In the realm of national security, it is used by law enforcement to tag suspects during protests or riots so they can be arrested later at their homes. The military applies this to mark enemy vehicles with infrared strobes or chemical sprays that are invisible to the naked eye, but glow like a beacon to laser-guided munitions, ensuring precise hits on moving targets. The legacy of SKILLET is the world we live in now, where your identity is your passport. We have moved from the jungle trails to the digital borders where every person is a walking data packet. The lessons of the refugee shadow are written into every facial recognition algorithm and every biometric database on the planet. This project proved that once the state has converted your physical presence into a string of numbers, you can never truly be anonymous again. The shadow cast by those Central American camps stretches across every modern smart city, tracking the movements of millions under the guise of safety and convenience. The refugee shadow isn't just about the 1980s, it's about the fact that anonymity has become a luxury of the past. The agency proved that when you are at your most vulnerable, you are at your most legible for the state. The skillet is still hot, and we are all within its reach. Every time you scan your face or you provide a thumbprint, you are participating in the expanded legacy of an operation that treated human suffering as a data gathering opportunity. We are no longer just people. We are a collection of biometric signatures stored in silos that we can neither see nor control. Take a moment to look at the CCTV cameras above you and realize they aren't just recording pictures, they are performing a constant census. Consider the data you volunteer every day and how easily that humanitarian benefit can be flipped into operational intelligence. The borders of the world have moved from the fences of the camps into the very palm of your hand, and the refugee shadow is the silent architect of that transformation. We live in the aftermath of a project that realized that the best way to control a population is to make it impossible for them to ever truly disappear. We must recognize that the shadow has become a predictive force. The databases built during SKILLET weren't just for looking at the past, they were for modeling the future. By understanding the demographic and behavioral markers of unrest, modern states can intervene before a movement ever begins. The preemptive identity management is the ultimate evolution of the refugee camp surveillance. We are entering an era where your biometric risk score may determine your freedom of movement long before you ever commit a crime. The echoes of SKILLET are found in the silent algorithms that decide who gets a visa, who gets stopped at a checkpoint, and who is quietly flagged for follow-up by an invisible hand. The jungle has been replaced by the digital forest, but the trackers are more precise than ever. Keep your eyes on the panel gaps, keep your ears open for the electric whine in a combustion world, and keep your mind sharp for the individuals that may or may not be behind you. Because in this land, you never can assume that a humanitarian app is only used for humanitarian purposes. The infrastructure of aid is often the infrastructure of surveillance. Understand that your physical geometry is a permanent password you can never change. Once your biometric data is leaked, it is gone forever. In a crisis, the person asking for your data is often more powerful than the person asking for your documents, because data creates a legacy that documentation cannot. And remember, once you have been indexed by the shadow, you never truly walk alone again, because the state never forgets a face it has already converted into code. Join us next time as we examine QR Rock, a project where the agency used the cover of geological expeditions to map the subterranean secrets of America's rivals. Imagine rock hammers that are actually seismic eavesdroppers, and geologists who are actually underground intelligence officers will look at the mountain bunkers, the mineral fronts, and the science of the shadows that turned the bedrock into a broadcasting station. Join us next time for the Stone Sovereign. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.